This is what God is saying. The wife must respect her husband. So when you respect your husband, you're not just respecting him, you are obeying the word of God. You are respecting God. And there's no way you will say you respect God if you fail to respect your husband. If you read another version of the Bible, they use the word reverence. And you and I know that reverence carries a deeper meaning than respect. So respecting your husband is something you have to do, not because he deserves it, not because you have to do that, but because it is something that God demands you to do. And when you respect your husband, you are also telling him that you want to have a peaceful home. Don't let anyone to deceive you in your marriage. If you fail to respect your husband, there's no way you will have a peaceful home. Hello everyone and welcome back to Transforming Marriages with me, Uju Onwuzulike. I am thrilled to be your host today. Do you know that a lot of marriages today are not falling apart because of external forces, but they are falling apart because of the harmful pieces of advice that they receive from their friends, from their colleagues, even from their family members? So in today's video, we will be exposing these misleading pieces of harmful and dangerous advice that have not only damaged marital relationship, but have also sent a lot of married couples away from their homes. So I want us to look at this harmful advice and see if truly these pieces of advice are the kind of advice that we need to receive from our friends, or if they are the kind of advice that we should avoid like a plague. By the way, if you're new to this channel and you've not subscribed, what are you waiting for again? I want you to subscribe to this channel, and I guarantee you I will always bring to your doorstep value-added programs that will help you to have a stronger and a healthier marriage. So let's proceed. What are these pieces of advice? The first on my list is men do not deserve our respect. That is not true. Don't let anyone to tell you that and mislead you and deceive you in your marriage. Don't let anyone to give you such an ill advice. Don't take such an advice from anyone. I had a story of a newly married woman that the husband took to America. A week later, she met someone that called her by the side and told her, "Do you know you're in America now? You need to know that men do not deserve our respect. You need to stop respecting your husband, because when you continue to respect him, it will get over him and he will start treating you badly." Do you know that that advice had an impact in that woman's life? I won't want to bore you with the remaining story, but the summary is that that woman's marriage ended up in divorce. That divorce would have been avoided if that woman did not give room to accepting such ill advice. That woman would have been divorced today if that woman didn't pay attention to such an advice. Respect is something that you owe your husband. And it is not something that your husband is asking from you. It is not something that your husband designed that you should give to him. It was something that God designed. It was something that God orchestrated. It was something that God knows that without this in a marriage, there might not be a peaceful home. And why did I say so? Don't take that from me. But let's go back to the Word of God. If you read Ephesians chapter 3, verse 33, the Bible said something very phenomenal. The Bible said, however, each one of you also must love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. This is what God is saying. The wife must respect her husband. So when you respect your husband, you're not just respecting him, you are obeying the word of God. You are respecting God. And there's no way you will say you respect God if you fail to respect your husband. If you read another version of the Bible, they use the word reverence. And you and I know that reverence carries a deeper meaning than respect. So respecting your husband is something you have to do, not because he deserves it, not because you have to do that, but because it is something that God demands you to do. And when you respect your husband, you are also telling him that you want to have a peaceful home. Don't let anyone to deceive you in your marriage. If you fail to respect your husband, there's no way you will have a peaceful home. God knows that without respecting your husband, there is no way you have a peaceful marital home. So don't allow anyone to mislead you, to tell you that men do not deserve our respect. And I've also heard a lot of people advising women, ill advising women, especially the younger women, telling them that men are not worth it. Men are not worth our respect. Men are not worth doing anything good for. That is a wrong advice. Don't take that advice. When you take that advice, you're likely going to destroy your marriage. So in this video, I'm advising you not to take such advice from anyone. Men deserve our respect. That leads us to number two, misleading advice, which is don't love your wife too much. I have heard a lot of men saying this, telling this to their friends. I've even heard someone tell me that don't love your wife too much. When you ask these people, why shouldn't I love my wife too much? They will almost tell you the same thing. They will say to you, when you love your wife so much that she will take you for granted. That is not true. And that is also a wrong advice. Loving your wife is not something you negotiate. And there is no amount of love you give to your wife that will be too much. Love can never be too much. And let me say this to you. Loving your wife is something you have to do. And it is not something I am telling you. Loving your wife is a must for you. And when you also look at the word of God, loving your wife is something you have to do. It's not something you negotiate. And it's also something that God demands from you. God knows that every wife will cherish love. God knows that every wife will want their husbands to love them. So if you read Ephesians chapter 5, verse 25, God has mandated all husbands to love their wives the way Christ loved the church. And because Christ loved the church, he was able to die for the church that he loved. That is the kind of standard that God demands from us. So don't allow anyone to ill advise you, to tell you not to love your wife too much. If you don't love your wife too much or so much, who are you going to love so much? Would that be a mistress outside that you will love so much? It is only your wife that demands that you love, and you have to love her adequately. There's nothing like loving your wife so much. You must love your wife the way Christ loves the church. That is the standard for you. Nothing more, nothing less. So in this video, I am encouraging you to refrain from taking such advice that would tell you not to love your wife so much. You have to love your wife so much. By loving your wife so much, you're saying to yourself that you want to have a peaceful home. Don't allow anyone to deceive you. There is no way you have a peaceful marital home if you do not love your wife. And when you love your wife, you're not only loving her, you are also obeying God's mandate, because He demands you to love your wife the way Christ loved the church. So that takes us to the third harmful advice, which is you should always put yourself first, even in marriage. That is not true. Marriage is not for selfish people. Marriage cannot thrive when each of the partners will be selfish. Marriage is for partnership. Marriage is not for selfish people. And the best thing to do in your marriage, if you want to have a successful marriage, is for you to always put the interest of your spouse before your own interest. If you don't put the interest of your spouse before your own interest, you end up becoming selfish. And this is why a lot of people are having problems in their marriages today. They are always thinking about themselves. They are not thinking about their spouse. But that is not how it's supposed to be. In marriage, you don't put yourself first. You put your marriage first. You also consider your spouse. Before you do anything in your marriage, you must consider your spouse, because you are not alone. You are married. And marriage will not thrive if there is selfishness in a marriage. So when anyone gives you an advice to always put yourself first, know that that person is giving you a wrong advice. For your marriage to thrive, for you to have a successful marriage, you must refrain from being selfish. You must always consider the welfare of your spouse. You must also consider the interest of your spouse in everything you do. So before you take a decision, you must also ask yourself, how would this decision impact my spouse? How would this decision impact my family? When you are doing that, when you are considering your spouse first, you end up having a peaceful marital home. But when you do not consider your spouse, when it is all about you, you will definitely have issues in your marriage. So don't take that advice of always putting yourself first. That is a wrong advice. You need to put your family first. You need to consider your spouse before any other thing. When you learn to consider your family first, when you learn to consider your spouse in everything you want to do, in every action you want to take, you will see that you will have a peaceful home. That leads us to the fourth harmful advice, which is if you are not happy, you should just leave. This is also a wrong advice, and a lot of people have been misled with this kind of advice. And this is why in any slightest provocation, you see a wife or a husband telling each other that I'm going to leave you, I'm going to leave the marriage. That is not how it should be. A lot of people will also tell you that I am in this marriage to have peace, and if you are not giving me peace, I won't be in this marriage. That after all, marriage is supposed to give them peace. That is a wrong mindset. That is not true. Marriage cannot give you peace. Marriage can be a source of peace, but marriages do not guarantee peace. What gives true happiness in marriage is when you are committed to build a stronger marriage, is when you are committed in seeing to it that your marriage work. What gives true happiness in marriage is when you are communicating effectively with your spouse. What gives true happiness in marriage is when you are navigating challenges together as a couple. What gives true happiness in marriage is when you are there for each other, when you are being supportive of your spouse. What gives true happiness in marriage is when there is mutual respect in that marriage, when there is love. If you don't have all this in your marriage, there is no way you want to have a peaceful home, and there's no way you'll be happy. So this is what I want everyone to know, that marriage on itself cannot give you happiness. Happiness is not something that someone gives to you. Happiness is what you bring to the table. Happiness is what you give to your spouse, but it's not something you receive. This is why I tell couples to do everything in their hands to always support their spouse. This is why I encourage them to always respect their spouse and to always love their spouse. When you do all these things, you will have a peaceful and a happy home. But if you don't do all these things, if you're not committed to seeing that all these things work in your marriage, there's no way you have a peaceful home. So happiness is not something that is being bestowed upon you simply because you are married. It is something that you work towards. It is something that you bring about as a result of your commitment in your marriage. That leads us to the fifth wrong advice, which is never let your spouse know everything. That is a wrong advice to give. Why shouldn't your spouse know everything? You can't build a stronger and healthier marriage without trust and transparency. And the only way you can build transparency is when you are open in your marriage. Without openness in your marriage, you cannot be transparent and there will be no trust. In one of my videos, I talked about trust being the currency of marriage. So without this trust in your marriage, there's no way you have a successful marriage. And you can't build trust if you are hiding anything from your spouse. You can only build trust when you are open to your spouse. And when you're open to them, you are demonstrating to them that you value that relationship. When you're open to them, you are demonstrating to them that you are transparent and you are not hiding anything and you don't have anything to hide. So I'm encouraging you in your marriage to stop hiding things from your spouse. That leads us to the sixth wrong advice, which is don't always appreciate your spouse. It will get to their heads. That is a very wrong advice to give anyone. If you have the right to correct your spouse, you also have the right to commend them. They also demand your commendation. If you are always correcting them, if you are always reprimanding them when they get things wrong, why wouldn't you also commend them when they get things right? I heard someone saying the other time, if I commend my husband, it will get to his head. I don't want to commend him. And that is a wrong thing to do. I'm encouraging you today to always appreciate your husband, to always commend your husband or your wife when they get things right, no matter how small what they have gotten right is. Learn to appreciate them, to be an expert in commending them when they get things right. If you begin to commend them when they get things right, you will see that they will begin to do more. But if you are always reprimanding them when they get things wrong, you're not encouraging them to grow. I am not saying that if there's any need to correct your spouse, that you shouldn't do that. But I am also saying that if you are correcting your spouse when they do things wrong, you should also commend them when they get things right. That helps your marriage to become stronger. That leads us to the seventh wrong reason, which is your spouse should automatically know what you want without asking. That is a wrong advice to give. No one is a mind reader. Don't always assume that your husband will know what you want. Don't always assume that your wife will know what you want. You need to always communicate your expectations to them. A lot of married couples have had problems today, all because they had assumed that their wives and their husbands know what to do. And when they fail to do those things, they will likely to get angry. They will get angry because they thought that their wives and their husbands ought to do what they expect them to do. But that is a wrong mindset. Don't always assume that your husband or your wife knows what to do. Communicate your expectations to them. It's only when you tell them what you like or what you dislike that they will know. Don't assume that they know what you like or they know what you don't like. Assumption is the least form of intelligence, and I've also done a video in the time past how assumption has destroyed many marital homes. So don't assume that your husband knows what to do. Don't assume that your husband ought to have done something, but he ended up not doing it. Always communicate what you want. It's only when you communicate what you want that your spouse will truly know what you want, and they will be able to do that thing that you want. And so that leads us to our eighth wrong advice, which is compromise is a sign of weakness. That is not true. And unfortunately, this wrong advice is usually given to men by their fellow men. Compromise is not a weakness, but rather compromise is a strength, and it is also a sign of emotional maturity. And the way I love to explain compromise in marriage is when couples are willing to meet themselves halfway. In other words, they are saying to each other, regardless of the fact that I have my own different views or my own perspective, I want to respect your own views. I want to respect your own perspective. That is how it's supposed to be. A lot of married couples today are having problems because they are not having a win-win situation. Without having a win-win situation in your marriage, you are likely going to have issues and challenges, because the losing party will not be happy. And if they are not happy, they will do everything to bring disharmony in that relationship. So the best thing for you to do is to always create a win-win situation in your marriage. And the way to do that is to compromise when you have to do. And like I have said, the way I want you to see compromise is when you are willing to meet your spouse halfway and not sticking to your own guns. I believe you have learned one or two things in this video, and I want to encourage you to subscribe to this channel. And I guarantee you, when you subscribe to this channel, I'll bring to your doorstep value adding content that will help you to build a stronger and a happier marriage. Till I see you next, keep supporting your spouses to be the best version of themselves and not the other way around. Enjoy the journey of your marriage.